If you're watching this, it's because you want to divide your dahlia tubers to make more of them, or you live in a cold enough zone that you need to dig them up and store them over winter to keep them safe. In the US, that's typically zone 6 or lower. I live in Iowa in zone 5. I dig my dahlias and I've tried a lot of different storage methods. I want to share with you which ones I think will work best for home gardeners. It's spring here in Iowa and I have pulled some of the dahlia tubers out of storage. And you can see I still use a number of different methods to store dahlias, and that's because some varieties just store better than others, and I've found that some methods work better to store certain hard to store varieties. Ideal storage temperature and humidity for dahlia tubers is 45 degrees Fahrenheit and 80 degrees humidity. Now, you can vary that within a range, but generally want to keep that humidity pretty high, and that's the hardest thing for me here in Iowa. I have experimented a lot with how to store dahlia tubers over time because I didn't always have a temperature and humidity controlled space to do so. I now store the dahlia tubers in our walk-in cooler, which is well insulated, and I heat that to 45 degrees in the winter. And that helps us keep the dahlia tubers around those ranges that we want. We also keep a humidifier in that room. If you are a home gardener, you're not going to have that space, right? So you have to choose the best spot in your home. Maybe it's an attached garage someplace. So my suggestion is to find the coolest place you can and just make sure they don't freeze. So it might be an attached garage, but you have to watch the weather and bring them into a basement or someplace when it's going to get down into freezing temps in that space. So the first thing would be to understand the temperature and humidity in the space you plan to store them. We're also going to monitor the temperature in the container that we store them in. So the one thing I suggest you purchase is a hygrometer and thermometer. So this tells us both the humidity and the temperature. And it also, this one happens to give me a range of the lowest and the highest that's been within a period of time. So I think this one's the last 24 hours. These are really inexpensive. You can get them for under $15. You can do a search for that and find where they're available. If you're a home gardener, I think the easiest method would actually be leave the soil on in the fall. Don't worry about dividing them until spring. The reason I suggest that is the soil is actually going to seal the tuber and hold the moisture into that tuber so it doesn't dry out over winter. There are ways to do that in place of soil, but if the soil is doing it for you and you don't have that many of them, it's really not a problem. The reason we wash ours as cut flower farmers is because we have to get that soil off at some point before dividing so that we can see the eyes. And also because soil may harbor things that we don't want to ship to you. So that's why we wash them. You don't have to do that as a home gardener. There's also no rule saying you have to divide them. Keep in mind, it's if you want to make more. So we'll go over dividing later, but you could just divide them in half if that's what you want, is two versus one. So the easiest method as a home gardener, as I said, I would dig the whole clump in the fall, leave the soil on versus this one that's been washed. And I would use either a cardboard box or a paper bag, put the tuber in. It has the soil on, so I don't need to add anything. Fold it or seal it up. The paper or cardboard is going to allow it to breathe enough, and put that in my location that I'm going to store them. So that would be easiest method, right? And I think that will work fine for most varieties. You will need to experiment some with what works for each variety. The next method would be if you're wanting to divide them in the fall or during winter, maybe you have a few more. The next step I would say, and you can do this even if they're not divided, would be to store them in something like this tub. I have a tub here with tubers in it, and I have kind of lasagnaed in layers the tubers. These happen to be divided with vermiculite, and you can use different substances for this. It doesn't have to be vermiculite. It could be sawdust. It could be the wood chips that you would buy like at the pet store for the bottom of a gerbil cage, or bedding that you'd buy for livestock. just something, and it's going to help. The reason we're going to do that, it's going to help hold in moisture, so you could actually put your humidity monitor inside the tub, and then you'll figure out, do I need to seal the lid or not, by what the humidity does, as well as do I need to spritz some water into whatever medium I have in there to hold the moisture in. And the other good thing about the medium is it will help, if it's something that absorbs water, it will help distribute the humidity throughout the container evenly, versus if we just spritzed in there with nothing in there, it wouldn't do that. The other good thing is it keeps them separated, so we're going to keep the dahlia tubers in layers. Try not to let them touch as we put them in layers, and that will keep them separated. If one does rot, it won't pass on to the next tuber. The other method, kind of next step up in difficulty, is wrapping the tubers in plastic wrap. Now, I don't love this method. I only use it in the case of hard to store tubers or really small tubers that I just think would desiccate easier. They're going to dry out easier because of their size. So a few varieties just tend towards small tubers, and a few others I've found are hard to store. Peaches and cream is one that I use this method on. A little more difficult to store. I still have to keep the temperature and the humidity monitored in the space that they're in, but I divide them and then individually wrap, or not individually in this case, but I'll wrap one and kind of keep rolling it as I wrap it. So they're ideally not touching, even though they're all in one bundle of plastic wrap. And by keeping them in bundles, then I can go back and check throughout the year to see how they're doing. One thing I didn't talk about is labeling. So in my case, I only have one variety per tub, so I don't have to worry about labeling them individually. But I'll keep a label in there. I also will keep in, you can see I've just dropped the field stake that was in with this variety in the box when we stored that. And then in the case of these crates, I'll just put that plastic label right on the crate. These crates are also handy. These are nursery crates. When I wash the tubers, this is how we transport them from the field, labeled immediately, and then we'll wash them and keep them in the crate until we move them on to their other method of storage. Once it's spring, you're going to need to get your dahlia tubers out of storage if they're in a cool space. If they are somewhere where you can just let the temp come up, that's great. That's what I do. I'll just let the temp naturally come up in that space. We don't have to heat it, obviously, in the spring. And that way they'll just acclimate over time, start to put their eyes on. I'll show you the eyes when we're dividing. But the good thing about that, it just lets the tuber do its own thing. I see a lot of people online forcing them in pots or doing crazy things like putting them in plastic bags. It's not necessary. A lot of people don't realize that dahlias are actually short day blooming plants, meaning they want to bloom when the days are shorter. That's not June. So here in Iowa, that's our longest days. So if you pot up early, maybe you pot them up 4 to 6 weeks before you would normally plant them out when the ground temp reaches 60 degrees, it's not going to give you 4 to 6 weeks earlier blooms. It might give you 2 weeks earlier blooms. So that's something to be aware of, whether or not it's really worth that effort to pot them up early. In my case, I choose not to. The only time I would do it is if there's a certain variety that I want to push ahead for some reason. Maybe there's a wedding in late June that I know I can get a couple of my early blooming varieties ready for by potting them up early. But yeah, that's the wrap up on storage. And next we're going to talk about dividing your dahlia tubers. Dividing dahlia tubers. First thing you should know is you don't have to divide a dahlia tuber. I could plant this whole clump and get a beautiful plant. I could also plant a single little tuber, and as long as it has an eye, I will get the same size of plant, and it will produce the same amount of blooms. Perfectly fine either way. So if I was someone who lived in a warm zone, I would probably elect to leave most of my tubers in the ground and not ever have to worry about digging them up and dividing them. It's not my favorite task. It's a good task for an evening in front of the television or listening to a podcast and tackling that. I have two tools here, which are the most important for dividing dahlia tubers. I have a pair of snips, and I like my floral snips because they have a long pointy tip on them that allows me to get into small spaces versus like a pair of bypass pruners where it'd be harder to use for this. The other really important tool is my strongest reading glasses, because I need to be able to see the details on these and see where the eyes are. So I have two tubers here. This is Castle Drive and Linda's Baby. And you'll see some of them just wake up faster than others. So Castle Drive is just waking up, has a nice little eye. I can see it really easy on here. I'm sure there's more as I get down in here, and there's some on the back, underside and back. And Linda's Baby is farther along. You'll see it's putting out a whole sprout here. And the only thing to know about these is if you do accidentally break one off, no big deal. It will just regrow from that same spot. So if you get one also shipped to you and it had a sprout on it that got broke off in shipment, don't worry about it. Just go ahead and plant that tuber as it was. As I'm dividing these, I'm probably going to have some trash, and I'm also going to want to have a box or something to put that tuber in from this variety so that I can keep those separated. So I'm going to grab those things and label that box. All right, I've got a bucket. I will put my stems and any other scraps in, and I also have a box here. I'm going to label it with which variety I'm going to divide. And I think for educational purposes, I'm going to use Linda's Baby because you can see the sprouts easier than this one that only has awake eyes. Now, these are awake because it's spring. And if you're worried about being able to see the eyes, that is my recommendation, is to wait until spring to divide these. Whether you wash them in the fall or the spring, once they've woken up, it's a lot easier to see them. If I'm dividing them in the middle of winter, it is really hard to see the eyes, in which case I will actually just keep all the tubers, wait and see which ones wake up, and then I can sort back through come spring and check our inventory and see what we've got. So I'm going to set my Castle Drive one aside. Now I will look at this first and kind of map out a plan. Dahlia tubers are, think of them like trees, right? Except upside down. So if this was a tree with stalk coming up, you can see there's multi-layers of branching. So we're gonna have layers, and then we also have the branches coming out from the trunk. And some of those, some varieties, it's easier to see that than others. This one, both of these I would say are kind of medium difficulty to divide in that they have, the tubers are close together. There's not a lot of space in between them, so that makes them harder to divide, but it's not a huge giant clump. Something like Cornell bronze, Cornell or brown sugar is going to make those giant clump of tubers. Makes it, even though it makes a lot of tubers, it makes it harder to divide. This one also, Linda's Baby has, this happened to have smaller stalks. You'll see this Castle Drive one slightly larger stalk. Get to something like Diva, which has giant tubers and stalks. It can get harder to get down through the stalks because sometimes we literally have to like stab down through and then pull them apart. This one shouldn't be too bad. And if you hear nails clipping on the floor, it's because Rue my dog just walked behind me. He's checking out the window. He likes to stalk when the mailman is coming. So I'm just throwing some of that stalk to the side here as I trim it off. He's headed back on patrol. Likes to check all the windows about this time of day. If you hear him start barking, it's because a delivery person has passed by. He likes to bark at people that don't talk to us. Once I talk to them, he's fine with them. But if I haven't talked to them, which is all our delivery people, when they stop by, he's like, you're not talking to them, so they must be dangerous. So I've just stabbed down through here. And I'm pulling that one out, and it does have an eye attached to this side. That eye is going to be really hard to keep on there. It might break off. But, so this is a good tuber. And that eye was hard to see. It was actually on the underside. So this is why you want to go ahead and start dividing before you decide which ones you're keeping. Just looking at this from the top, I wouldn't have even known that had an eye attached. In cases like you're going to see there's two here, there's actually an eye on both of those, but the chances of me getting down in between them are slim. So I might leave those two together. We'll see as I take it apart if that's possible. And you can see I'm both going in with my snips and cutting, as well as pushing some so that I'm trying to pop them apart. And you'll see like there's another little tuber over here that would be really hard to cut in between, and it's kind of layered, where I need to take that off as a layer. And then the other catch, probably really hard to see, there's a really stringy little tuber that goes down and in between these. So I'm going to snip that one off because it's not one I would keep. We don't keep the really little stringy things. And that will help free the others up. So you can see I just took off this little stringy thing so that I can get my snips in there and try to break off this layer of tubers. There's like 3 right here that I'm just going down and trying to get under and push those up. Now, I will always lose some tubers. There's always going to be some that break, that the eye that's up here, the tuber ends up breaking at the neck or something. And if you only have a few dahlias, that's probably going to be super precious to you. So you see one of those just came off and it separated. It has a good eye on it. So I'm going to keep that one. And now there's still these 2 that I'm trying to get off of here. I'm just going to snip down in there, and they came off together. And I'm going to trim up. I don't need these extra stringy things that are attached to them. Will do no good. They'll regrow roots and start making new tubers as they grow. You see there's one eye and it sits almost in between these 2. I'm going to just leave those stuck together then and not try to divide that. And you'll see I washed these, but there's like some dirt attached here because you cannot get all the dirt in the middle before they're separated sometimes. Now you'll see one just fell off here from where I was snipping, and it has no eye. And I know this is a very awake tuber, so if there's no visible eye on this at this point, chances are I won't get one. So I'm going to go ahead and just put that in my compost bucket. And depending on the variety, it may have more or less blind tubers, is what that's called. It's referred to a blind tuber because it has no eyes. And again, I'm just pulling off some of this stringy stuff. Makes it easier to see what I'm doing. And I'm just kind of deciding where do I want to go next. So this had multiple stems coming out of the tuber, and I'm going down in between where those were to try to pull off sections. So you can think of them as both trees, but also sometimes they are multi-stemmed trees or multiple trees that have grown together. So you can see I pulled off 3 here. Again, unless I need a lot of tubers, I might as well leave these 3 attached. I could take one off. If I say, depending on how I was storing them, maybe it's really unhandy to have one jutting out to the side, then I could just snip that one off and keep these 2 together. That works too. So again, this is last year's stems. I've already taken 1 stem out. There were 3 coming up out of this. And I'm just gonna, looks like the next logical spot to try to get separated is right here. And in some cases, you'll see I'm pulling and breaking here as much as I'm snipping. So it really depends on the situation. And again, when I look at this one, it will be easier to leave these 2 attached together and keep this eye. I don't need this stringy thing that's coming up. That's a where it had started to form a tuber toward the end of the season. Now we're left with this clump. I have one I know is there. There could be another down in there. I'm going to go right through this middle section here. Try to get that one off. And voila. Okay, now this one, I'm just going to get rid of that one because both, it has two eyes. I just broke this one, but I know it's there, right? So I'm going to just toss that sprout. It came up, it will regrow from that same spot and we'll keep that tuber. This one, I cut the nick off. I'm going to toss it. And that wraps up the tedious task of dividing dahlia tubers. It's not near as tedious if you only have a few to do. So I wish you best of luck storing and dividing your dahlia tubers. Approach it as an experiment and something fun to play with. Don't stress about it. Remember, if you're dividing dahlia tubers and you started out with a clump and you come away with 3 or 4 tubers to plant, or even 2 tubers to plant, you've already gained more than you had. So don't stress about that one you happened to stab through and ruined or broke the neck off of. It shouldn't be stressful. Gardening should be fun. And gaining new plants is a blast, right? So have fun.